Bush made me safer? My answer, in personal terms, is no. He hasn't. My answer would be that Bush has made us less safe. Bush has made us less safe because he willfully ignored what he heard from the Clinton administration about terrorism and about its preeminence as a threat to the United States. And the new administration preferred to focus on missile defense. George Bush made us less safe, or has left us less safe, because the president responded to an attack on Washington and New York by invading Afghanistan and then leaving it as insecure as he found it, letting Al-Qaeda and the Taliban flow back into a vacuum that U.S. forces left. George Bush has made us less safe because he started a preemptive war with Iraq that did not have to be fought, that, despite everything Christopher just said, was not necessary, was not forced upon the United States. And though he concluded military action quickly, the war has gotten steadily worse. Since Christopher and I met last in Berkeley, 9 months ago, more than 350 Americans are dead. More than 2,000 are wounded, many of them grievously wounded. About 10,000, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 Iraqis are dead. And the war, as I can testify from personal experience over the last couple of weeks, is getting worse. These are facts. When I arrived in Baghdad about 3 weeks ago, there were an average every day of 15 attacks on American forces. When I left, the average had gone up to nearly 35. Every day, 1, 2, 3 Americans are being killed in Iraq. And for all the talk about the fact that 80% of the country, 60% of the country, 95% of the country is perfectly fine and pacified, in fact, the area in which fighting is going on, in which Americans and Iraqis are being killed, is steadily broadening. Since major combat was declared over, the situation has steadily gotten worse, and over the last 2 weeks, it has gotten dramatically worse. And on the evidence I saw, and the people I spoke to, which included a number of senior generals, very, very able people, very intelligent people, with all of the technological resources of the United States of America at their command, my impression at the end of a lot of talk, a lot of interviews, many of them off the record, was that the American military is completely at sea. They don't know how to fight what is a growing insurgency. Bush has made us less safe because he has debilitated the main arm of defense against terrorism, and that is the United States intelligence agencies, which are now fighting in full-throated anger against the administration. You have a CIA battle against the White House as we sit here in this hall, which will, as the election approaches, get worse. Now, Christopher has just made an argument that all this was completely necessary. He argues that Saddam Hussein was strong, erratic, would have gained in weapons and power, and indeed would have reached the point where he would have handed over power to his admittedly quite disgusting progeny. He also argues that the Iraqi regime was getting weaker and was about to implode, and that such an implosion would have inevitably drawn in the neighbors of Iraq and into a situation in which the United States would be forced to intervene. I'll leave it to you to decide whether these two arguments cited in quick succession make sense next to one another. It seems to me he was either getting stronger or he was getting weaker. You can ponder that question, noble audience. And we can, for a moment, go back 9 months to the last time we appeared together in Berkeley. As I recall, Christopher argued very vehemently that the United States was under imminent threat from weapons of mass destruction, that those weapons were being hidden, that the inspectors who were sent by the United Nations to find them were thoroughly incapable of doing so, that indeed a nuclear weapon could be produced by the Iraqi regime in relatively short order, that the United States indeed was forced, under the shadow of these threats, to intervene. We have since found out that much of what we heard from the administration in making this argument was false. We know much of the intelligence information was, how should we put it, crooked, exaggerated, manipulated. We've heard this from leaks from within the administration, and particularly from the CIA, and we have seen it with our own eyes. Donald Rumsfeld said, "We know where these weapons are." Condoleezza Rice said, "This threat may become a mushroom cloud." All of these things were false. That doesn't necessarily constitute a decisive argument for not going to war with Iraq. It should leave us as citizens somewhat skeptical of the arguments now put forward by those who argued these things a mere few months ago. The citizens of the United States were essentially swindled into supporting a war that was not necessary. They were swindled into supporting a war that is getting more serious, more difficult by the day. They were told that an imminent threat had to be confronted. And in fact, I would argue, the country has become involved in a war that will end up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was a war against terror. Well, you have a situation on the ground where more and more jihadists are coming over what are now fairly open borders into Iraq. Were we worried at the time that Iraqis would be killing Americans? Well, they are doing so right now. Were we worried there would be more suicide bombing? Well, we see it on our television screens every day. Are we hearing arguments, as Christopher so delightfully put it in characterizing George Bush's talent for paradox, that these attacks show us quite simply that the opponent is becoming more desperate? Well, that's a fascinating argument. I guess it would lead us to believe that when the attacks stop, that is the time to really worry. I was in Baghdad the other day heading for an interview when my car was nearly thrown off the road by an enormous explosion. I was about a block away from the Red Cross. When I arrived, I was the first journalist there, one of the first people there. I found a scene of really indescribable horror. Flames 12, 13 feet high, curtain of black, dense black smoke, bodies everywhere. And this was the first of 4 suicide bombings that day. These were not going on 9 months ago in Iraq. The attacks on Americans, needless to say, were not going on 9 months ago in Iraq. There has been no proof of an imminent threat that was posed to Americans by Saddam Hussein. There is proof that the United States, having undertaken this foolish war, has increased the risk to American citizens, to America's young people who are now there dying every day and increasingly bewildered why they are there dying every day, and increased the risk to us. Because, as I predicted 9 months ago, Iraq could easily be made into an area for al-Qaeda to build its support and to increase its political backing in the world, in the Middle East especially. The United States has managed in the last 9 months to create exactly that. Bush has not made us safer.
7 minutes for rebuttal. Hitchens?
Bill Clinton did actually make a speech on the steps of the Pentagon in 1998, which I can give anyone a copy of if they wish, saying that there was no escaping the fact that there would have to be a war with Saddam Hussein one day.